Welcome. We have so much exciting stuff to share with you today here on the SunSpear Games panel. I'm Anna Prosser. I'm going to be your host. I'm joined by three amazing people who love dogs. And we were tempted to make this panel about dogs, but that will be for another day. Today, we will instead be talking about SunSpear Games and Immortal Gates of Pyre. But I want to introduce you to these folks right away, tell you a little bit about what they do, and who better to do that than all of you. So, Coulter, if you could start, could you introduce yourself to the people and tell them what you do, what your job title is, and then what that means in case anyone's not familiar?
Yes. My name is Coulter Hochsteller, and my job title is Dog, or Director of Game.
You are
Nice.
the dog. This panel is about it.
You're
That's
the dog
exactly
now,
right.
dog.
And so basically what I do is I oversee the design organization, and I help make sure that all these wonderful inputs from gameplay, the PvP, the PvE side, lore, all weave into a cohesive experience and basically do that. And so what that looks like on a day-to-day basis is a lot of spreadsheets and a little bit of playing the game every day, which is real fun.
And a bit of magic.
Oh, that's true.
He is the
All
son
right.
of Merlin.
Really, we've got some wizards in the chat today too. Awesome.
Great.
Well,
Okay.
what about you, Travis? Could you do the same? Introduce yourself. Tell us what you do.
Hi, yeah, I'm Travis Heller. I'm the lead gameplay designer here at SunSpear Games. And then basically, I'm the person you get to blame if something's wonky about the game and your units are completely overpowered that are destroying you. So come blame me. That'll be fun. But as far as overall just responsibilities, you do everything. I do everything from just making sure that all our gameplay philosophies and PvP are followed. Um, you know, overall philosophies for what the art should conform to make sure that it's serving gameplay, etc. And then I wear also a bunch of hats, so I also do a bunch of tech stuff as well. So if you want to talk about movement systems and local steering and all sorts of fancy stuff like that, I'm definitely happy to talk about that as well, and also
Well,
networking, etc.
he's a little bit like Art's final boss. Like they have to make sure all of the stuff that they
That's true.
create can clear the
Well, and also
gameplay
the first Dark
requirements.
Souls boss too. Like when you're just getting into like, what's this genre? And it's like there's two forms, and you're like, no.
I get to say that's really cool. Do it again.
Yep.
Awesome, but
True.
no. You have
Awesome,
some
but
cool
yeah.
stuff to show us later too, I think. So that will be really exciting. But before we get going on that, Dylan, what about you? Who are you? What do you do?
I'm an Omega nerd. So I'm the creative director. I'm responsible for all of the writing and a lot of the character design, and I'm one of the forces that introduces gameplay for design to tear apart and to stitch into something that actually works. I am the kind of person that if you ever want to take issue with anything that's been written for one reason or another, feel free to reach out to me. I like to get into nerdy stuff, linguistics, world building, all that stuff.
Lore comes from you, right?
Yep, all
Cool.
the lore.
Thank you guys. I'm really excited to get into this. Today, we're going to be doing a little bit of everything. We're going to start by talking a little bit about SunSpear Games and the history of how we got here, what the development has looked like so far, what we're excited about. And then we're going to be transitioning into taking some questions from you from the Discord, which is really exciting. I think that will be the meat of our discussion today. So we'll get a lot deeper once we go there about the actual game and the future and things like that. But because we want to start by looking back, I want to talk a little bit about the history of the game. I know that you guys come from very, very deep RTS roots. So tell me a little bit about where the beginnings of your game developerhood came from at SunSpear Games.
Well, once upon a time, a beautiful game I loved called Starcraft 2. It was the king of esports. It wore that title with a beautiful crown. And then MOBAs came along and were like, hey, you can play strategy games with an ally, and that feels good most of the time. Well, actually,
Mostly.
might be a little bit too generous. But the point is,
It
it
was there.
quickly just gathered a ton of players. And it was like, okay, so we can keep doing the strategy competitive thing better. What's the next step of innovation? What can we do? And so that started this journey, which was like, let's make a game. And then it was like, actually, let's walk that back and let's practice our design skills for a long time. And so we actually met on the Team Liquid forums and tried all kinds of crazy strategy game designs before we ended up with what we did.
How did you all connect there? How did you meet? How did your joint interests bring you together?
Ranting.
Yes, angry nerd ranting. Actually, that's how I started what would be a multi-year journey in modding and sort of the competitive Starcraft community. Coulter, Travis, and Tom Labonte
Tirade.
were my guides, but I just kind of jumped in because I got into an argument with Dustin Browder and Joseph Kim on the StarCraft 2 forums about the design of Protoss and StarCraft 2 relative to their design in Brood War, and how there was a lot of like basically sort of feel bads surrounding the design decisions around force field and warp gate specifically, and how that made this sort of elite faction feel very disposable,
Mm.
and that made me mad. So I was an angry nerd. That's how I started, and
Yeah.
culture
I was
for
thinking, I
some
was like,
reason was compelled by that.
yeah, I was like, okay, what can a competitive game learn from traditional sports? Like you focus on a ball, everyone can pay attention to that spot mostly. That's useful, and just like all these other ideas, trying to pull it in. And then I saw his post, the post specifically that he's referencing, where it was like the gameplay promises big badass warrior. The gameplay feel is tricky elf hiding behind magic, and that mismatch really feels bad. And I was like, wow, that is a perspective I hadn't even considered. I was just in the mechanics layer, and so I was like, all right, let's marry theme and mechanics. Let's have this conversation. And so I called Dylan, and he ranted to me about how great Morrowind lore was for 2.5 hours.
Yeah, that's about right.
I got that. I got that bit quite a bit.
It was an early rite of passage, and it selected
Focused on me.
for very strongly patience among my coworkers.
I'm curious, you said there were some feel bads, and I think maybe for people who aren't as familiar with like game design speak, tell us what that means and why that's important to you, and why someone like you who's kind of in the creative realm would pick up on those things.
Sure. So, and this is something actually that is very keenly felt in user experience design. That Coulter, I think, has taught a lot to me over the years, as well as Travis. It's sort of a uniform thing. Any piece of an interactive experience, or frankly, traditional experiences like cinema, are built on promises that creators make with their audience,
Mm.
and those commitments and set expectations. And very skilled, or visionary creators can use that to meet or usurp or subvert expectations in a way that's really compelling and exciting. However, if you don't meet that in a satisfactory way, you often can generate frustration or, outright, anger.
Mm.
Because, and you can see that, sort of watching a lot of recent sort of reboots or new trilogies on sort of legacy IPs. People
Mm.
have strong expectations about what to take away from those kinds of experiences. So I guess from a lore perspective, the key thing is really, really don't focus on building a world that is believable, that sets its own rules and follows them, and only deviates if there's actually a reason for it, and not one that feels like you're jumping the shark or creating something just for convenience.
So that was something that you observed that you got into this fight on the Team Liquid forums about. And Travis, where did you jump in? Were you involved in those conversations?
Not originally. So I came from kind of a different sphere. So I came just from being a standalone modder by myself for the most part, and then eventually joining the Starbo team. So I came from modding like the original Command and Conquer, that originally came on DOS, back before like Windows was mainstream. So I've been
An
modding games
elder
since then.
gamer.
StarCraft Brood Wars, a lot of StarCraft Brood War, Warcraft, Age of Empires, modding all those games, all those old RTSs. And I came in from StarCraft 2, working on Starbow. And Starbo's main mission statement was trying to bring a lot of the fundamental mechanic and design ideas that Brood War had, that StarCraft 2 kind of lacked, didn't really kind of get until later on, and bring them into the StarCraft 2 engine. Kind of like get the magic of that game, but bring it into StarCraft 2, which is had unlimited selection, multi building select. All in War or Brood War, like you can only order 12 units around it. It was just like incredibly clunky. There's a reason like not a lot of people play it anymore. It's just like way out of date. It feels like I love Day 9's analogy for this, which is like it feels like you're manually doing a sailboat yourself, every single part of
Yes.
rigging and everything, compared to like you just driving a modern powered boat.
Mhm.
I'm gonna go
So
with jet ski.
I
Actually, jet ski's more fun. Let's do that.
I came
Yeah.
from yeah, jet ski, heck yeah. I came from doing the just being a community member in that game, and then eventually being co-lead designers with my good friend Zephius from that community. So I had all these nice, cool ideas, and I was already kind of working on the idea of accessibility and like all these mechanics of like rush distance, how big a map should be, how that kind of affects like armies being able to push each other, all these like RTS fundamentals, new unit ideas, etc. And it kind of had this running thread in it. Like it was still kind of like a homage to this very elitist idea of like Starcraft Brood War, but it still had like how do you bring this amazing gameplay that is just so fun and like interesting to watch, interesting to play, interesting to think about, and bring it into systems that are a lot more accessible, which would be like the StarCraft 2 engine. Oh no, am I lagging? Okay, cool, good.
You're all good now.
So yeah, I kind of like ended up talking. I had this person named It Who Speaks on the Team Liquid forum reach out to me, and I thought, wow, this is the most arrogant name I've ever heard.
That was true, by the way. That's setting an expectation that I can meet.
Yeah, so yeah, that's true. So when Dylan ended up reaching out to me for a conversation about stuff, and like, hey, do you want to come meet up with this project called One Goal? And like it had the goal of like bringing it together, like all these different communities to try to build like one big main project, right? That could have further reach, right? So it was very collaborative in spirit. And so we talked a bunch, and there was a lot of disagreements at first, but through the process of talking and arguing, lots of hour-long talks with Dylan on the phone and us arguing about Scourge versus Banelings and why they're different and why that sappers can work on ground units versus air. Like just the most like tiny details that we would just argue about. Um, and we would learn to kind of like build a shared communication, right? Through that process, I kind of like went towards and ended up grouping and teaming up with everybody. And then I became like the maiden modder that was in charge of
Yeah.
basically kind of like the R&D process for the game we wanted to build, where we ended up making various different projects and prototypes and trying to like experiment with ideas and come up with basically kind of like the game that we actually want to build, because until then it was kind of nebulous. We had this idea of the like main goals and criteria of the project, but yeah, until then, like I was basically Mr. Mad Scientist person, basically.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, one still is, but two, you have not experienced Travis R&D until you receive a call at like 11:30 at night or later, and it's from Travis, and Travis goes, "Hey, can I borrow you for a second? I want to run this build by you." And you never know what's going to be coming out of that laboratory, and you just go into a map. And I remember the first time that happened, and it was so striking in so many ways how similar it was in terms of economics and unit design and how positioning worked and how micro worked, uh, to what we would later test years later in Vanguard. Completely divergent thing. It was just something he happened to be chewing on, just in terms of how economy works with things that establish and hold position versus things that dislodge position. And that was the moment for me when it really clicked that this person had a formative mind and
Mm.
was one of the most talented and intelligent people I've ever met.
So how did we go from here we are on Team Liquid forum and modding and thinking about ideas and arguing about StarCraft to we are SunSpear Games. We are developing Immortal Gates of Pyre. Where was the jump point between this is something we do because we are really interested and passionate about it to this is what we're going to do to create a real game? It's going to be our main job, our passion, and we're going to share it with the world.
I'll give
Well,
you a
it's a
half
failure.
truth.
A
I'll give you
half
a half
truth?
truth answer. Yes. Yeah. Then they can finish.
What about the other half?
Well, I'll leave that to those guys.
Okay.
Yeah, I have faith. But I think part of it was like we had always worked together with the intention of making a game.
Mm.
So I actually approached Dylan and was like, we need to make a game. He's like, we need to mod and get good first. Right. So it was always kind of simmering in the background. But then when Legacy of the Void implemented some of our recommendations, but like not all of them, and some of
Mm.
the key components that really brought it together were missing, at least in our view. It was like, oh, now we really just like we really want to get the opportunity to really implement all of that finely crafted origami of gameplay that we've been cooking up in the laboratory.
Yeah, I think sort of the evolution of StarCraft 2. So when I started, my primary focus was on not only learning how and what made StarCraft work, and what elements were in tension with that, but really I came from a position of deep love for StarCraft. One goal was intended to sort of serve this as a sort of a public test realm, and this is years before the PTR was ever adopted by Blizzard for StarCraft 2. And gradually, as I encountered and learned more about how certain things operated at a cultural level in the industry, the more I became frustrated with that and went, well, no, we really, I think, can do something that contributes to this. I think there's things that we can do to move this forward by working with the community, and building a community and learning from that community. And I think that was the sort of key thing for me was, yeah, around Legacy of the Void going like, my God, there is so much we can actually offer if we continue on this path of relentless learning, self-reflection, improvement, and growth. Well, we can do something really special.
Travis, anything to add to that other half?
Yeah, it was like a whole lot of failures in terms of like modding different ideas, experiments, crazy ideas. We had an initial idea of like, you know what, heck, snowballing. We want to try to see what we can get away without snowballing. Turns out snowballing is kind of integral to every single part of like these long-term strategy games, right? Like a MOBA is cool and interesting long form story wise because of the snowballing factor, right? Strategy games. There's not a lot of like pure tactics games that don't have snowballing in them because like kind of like that's the core gameplay loop and kind of what's fun about it. So we tried
Really
various
quickly,
ideas to try to attack that. Yeah, go ahead.
just in case somebody is like, what's snowballing? What are you referring to there?
So snowballing is the process of building more and more and more advantages via like economic decisions or tactics or beating up your opponent. So I guess a key difference would be like in a fighting game, like you just punch your opponent and theoretically you could knock your opponent down to like 1 HP. They've got 1 hit left, but theoretically if they were to just block all of the rest of your attacks, um, assuming no chip damage, if you know what that is, they could theoretically just perfect you back and just completely flawlessly destroy the very next sequence of exchanges. Versus like in a game of chess, if you start taking their pieces, they now have less options. They are now effectively less powerful. Or in a MOBA, whenever you get a kill, you get more gold, you buy better equipment. All of a sudden, it starts becoming easier for you to just before you could just like maybe barely 1v1 a guy, and now maybe you're just absolutely farmed and have tons of items and you can just destroy 1v4 and just completely sweep the enemy team, and that kind of
Yeah,
brings the game into a close.
the mental image is like you've got a little snowball on top of the hill, and then your first
Yeah.
advantage makes you a larger snowball, which makes it easier to get your next advantage. And so it's that accumulation of advantages, and then you've got a giant snowball at the bottom of the hill that just plows over the enemy team.
Yeah,
So
that's
why
it.
was it that you all were like, what can we do without snowballing? Why did you want to get rid of it and see what happened then?
It can feel really
Go ahead,
bad when
Coulter.
you're behind. Like you know, it on the positive side, you enable this power fantasy, and this is something that MOBAs do really, really well. Is wow, I'm so cool, I can blow you up instantly, or I can just take all this damage and not care. And so you work hard, and then you get these really cool moments where you feel like super powerful. On the flip side of that, it can make the other players feel super helpless. They feel like they don't have tools to get back into the game, and it turns out, like, we thought initially, okay, we want people to feel powerful, but like it's so bad, what just happens if we cut it out? So because we did many major development branches, some that were like 80% MOBA, some that were like 20% MOBA, and now we're landing in that sort of like 45% range, maybe 40% in that area. But when we were trying this version where it was very anti-snowball, you could respawn your armies, which means you didn't care about their welfare. You weren't motivated to protect them. You were motivated to throw them at the enemy as fast as you could and then get them respawning again to see what damage you could do. And it was exhausting. There was no downtime. You're just smashing each other. And in fact, if you want to play this experience, not that I strongly recommend it. If you want to play it, it is in the StarCraft 2 arcade under the name Raze. That was one of our earlier oh, we're not as good at designers as we need to be. This didn't quite all come together moments.
Yeah, very old at this point.
But Travis,
Yeah, so
you were telling us about snowballing in the context of when we went from playing together, thinking together to this is our job now.
Yeah. So that's one of the many failures, right? About like just kind of like learning and experimenting. Like what can we push? What can we break and bend with these different ideas? We've tried like you could literally instead of like producing troops one at a time, you would slot in a unit type into a production building, and that would just like respawn that unit over time. And you literally just had like free units. So we had all these like different crazy experimental ideas that have never been used before in any games, and trying out those ideas and kind of like narrowing down to the point that we're like, all right, this is it. And this is when we kind of landed on Vanguard mod, which is still very people still love to play today, which makes me super happy. And we ran tournaments on it with professional StarCraft 2 players. And then we had a
Context.
lot of glowing feedback from professional StarCraft 2 players. I was expecting like heavy like elitism backwards to us about it, and I'm like, no, they actually loved it. Like I'm so surprised because they it felt like that would be the hardest part, would be to win them over. But we
Yeah, just for
tried with
context.
low level players. Go ahead, Coulter.
Yeah, for context, Vanguard is the last mod that we built before we said, okay, let's make a game. So it was the culmination of all the efforts, the final validation, and then rolled into SunSpear.
Yeah. So we landed on that and did a little bit more modding stuff to kind of get initial faction ideas and stuff playing around with. And then that at that point that was the game. That was like, okay, we're happy. This is we were finally at the point where this is the game we want to build. There's not everything in there we can do because there's some custom code we'll have to do to bring everything together, especially on the UX UI front. Where
Only so many
which,
ways you can
makes
trick
it even
the
more
Galaxy
accessible.
editor to do what you need it to
Yeah.
do.
I did a lot. We
Oh
we
my
had
god,
this idea
more.
of in most RTSs you have to like click a unit type, and then you can push a button for it to cast that spell that they have, or ability, whatever. Unlike a MOBA where you don't have to like click different units to use different spells from different things. It's just crazy. So I tricked the editor so that you could have all of your unit types selected, and you could push a button, and you could always cast an ability no matter what you had selected. So I made that happen. It was incredibly manual and annoying to do, but I made it work in the StarCraft 2 engine. So that kind of thing, we build the game from the ground up, so we're going to have it. And there's all these other quality of life things. So yeah, that was amazing to get to that point where like we're finally like, wow, the game pace is amazing. Like we're really enjoying the heck out of these tournaments. It's only going to get better with our own custom UI and UX. Like this is amazing. This is outstanding. And then we finally like really started pushing for wanting to make the company right, and get artists and get more programmers, get more people who can help us navigate biz dev, etc.
Was there anything else you wanted to add about kind of the criteria where you looked around and you were like, we're ready. We're ready to do this on our own. I think, Dylan, you were talking about that.
Yeah. So we made kind of a covenant with each other, a promise to ourselves, that we would not try to start the company until we had gameplay that was fully baked or as close as we could manage. And so one of the first things that we did when we set out on this quest to go, okay, we're going to make a company with the goal of eventually with the goal of making the next great game. Um, we set a series of criteria that the game had to have competitive integrity, that it had to have fair and inclusive monetization, that it had to be deeply accessible to all to sort of all skill levels. Um, and it ended up being something like 15 or 18 criteria that eventually got condensed, shortened, and made more concise down to 10. And getting all 10 was really hard. It was like
Yeah.
3 years, 4 years of soul searching. And there were times where we were not sure because we were approaching this from a scientific perspective. We weren't sure if we could thread that needle. And I remember exactly where I was when I got the call from Travis. I was walking my dog in an area with really poor service because it was kind of in the back country of the mountains in Montana. And he went, "Hey, I figured it out. I figured out how we can manage." And this was basically just sort of how production was managed and how UX UI would be integrated into unit macro, and how it all hook up to the economy. And that was the last sort of missing thing where we could actually have the game play well for low skill and new players and still maintain that pristine sort of skill gap in the top 1 and top 0.1%. And my heart just about stopped because it was just one of the biggest things that we had all labored on so much and had sweated over. And so that was the moment, that the other co-founder, Ian Hunt, who's in the chat, I called him and I went, "Dude, Travis did it. We did it." And he went, "Okay." And that started the sort of process of company building and putting out feelers and stuff.
I want to, before we move on to talking about Immortal and what's been going on so far and where the beginnings began and all of that, I want to back up a little bit because you were talking about the promise that a creator makes to their audience. And it
Mm.
sounds to me like you all were very um interested in the promise of RTSs or maybe even secondarily of MOBAs, and that was something that was so important to you that if somebody wasn't going to get it right, then you had to do it yourself.
Yes.
So so I want to ask about your love for this genre specifically. Why is RTS so important to you personally? Why is it such an important kind of game to get right? And let's start with Coulter because you haven't spoken in a while.
All right. So for me, that there is a promise that RTS makes. It's kind of funny because RTS as a genre concept includes MOBA, right? Like, and then it created its own name, but it also includes like real time tactics kind of games. So it's kind of hard to pin it. But in terms of like getting resources, building a base, fighting armies, that experience, there's so much cool promise of like you're going to be a tactician in combat. You're going to make decisions that really impact the next few minutes of gameplay, and things aren't resetting. Like there's this accumulation of your choices in the gameplay, and I don't know. I was told moving stories through this format. I remember playing Age of Empires 2 and playing the Mongol horde and running around and like making all of these alliances. And as a kid, it was just like it was an experience that I couldn't get anywhere in my hometown. It's like, oh wow. And even though it's like a kind of a very simplified comparison to real world industry, like seeing, you collect the wood and you make the ship, and now this is your ship, and then the monk just converted the ship. Oh no, now it's the enemy's ship. Like all of that experience just sort of gave a framing and a storytelling that was really, really cool to me. So I like the story of nations and I like the combat of fighting battles. And I wanted to make a game that let players get to the part of fighting. without having to do so much work and maybe hurt their hands with the amount of speed or effort and have to run drills and stuff like that. I wanted it to be something that people could just play, fight armies, see what happens, have fun.
Mm. What about you, Dylan and Travis? Why is RTS so important to you personally?
I think, yeah, I kind of sit squarely, kind of in the middle, where, yeah, there's something special about the spectacle of
Mm.
old Brood War.
Mm.
Both the story, there's multiple stories when you go and you look at like the OSL, like in 2005 or 7, where there's the human story of these people, usually, from South Korea, finding themselves and growing and mastering this deeply complex and hard to grip game where, yeah, you are basically doing sail rigging, but you're also like doing Van Cliburn tier like piano competitions in terms of like manual dexterity and endurance, and you're playing blind chess poker with someone else as fast as you can. And that's a beautiful story of how these different minds are set against each other in friendly competition. And then there's this other story that's transposed over that, where it's this epic sort of science fiction space opera between these three very iconic factions, and that was always deeply compelling to me. I grew up Lord of the Rings. I got into Song of Ice and Fire. It was a synthesis of so many different things that I found deeply compelling.
Mm. Travis, how about you?
Yeah, for me, it always to me felt like I basically just came from every game. I'm just a super turbo nerd. I've played
Not
every genre of
kidding.
game. I got incredibly good at first person shooters, still am. I played tons of 4X strategy games, like the whole the whole gamut of games. And JRPGs, etc. Like I played everything. Um, so in terms of like genre of game, I always felt like specifically real-time strategy games to me always felt like the most game. You know what I mean? This is the most game a game can possibly be, right? Like, and that's what's incredible about it. Because like it's the older ones because of the all these limitations are hard to get into, like really hard to get into. But in terms of like what the experience is, right? Like you're playing a racing game. I'm thinking about like racing lines and time to break, etc. Fighting games, it's like it's really fast rock paper scissors, but with so many layers and mind games, reading and etc. But then as soon as I play a real time strategy game or like a MOBA that really appeals to me, or any other very fast real time strategy game, it feels like there's so many layers that are so hard baked into the experience that you're so engaged. At least like the fast ones that more appeal to me, right? So like Starcraft, Age of
And we'll never know. He was
I'm
never
gonna
gonna
Well,
guess it was Age of Empires. I can't be
yes,
sure, but I'm
there
gonna
we go.
guess.
I think he's back.
Okay, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Woo!
Yes, sir.
Come on, internet, I believe in you. Here, I think I have the stream turned on in the background, so I'm gonna turn that off as well. Yeah, it always felt like there's so many layers that you're engaged with where like, okay, I'm not only am I like doing like really engaging actiony micro as part of this core experience, I'm like using tactics to do drops. I'm thinking about where I set up like defensive lines here and there, and then I'm also caring about where I'm like focusing my attention, all the time. Like it always felt like the most engaging core experience to any kind of game that I've ever played. So yeah, it's incredible. I really want to get
Really want to get more dogs is, I'm
Yeah.
sure, what that one was going to be. Also, probably more people into RTS.
Yeah.
As Travis comes back, which we hope he will, uh, a little birdie told me that we have some photos to check out.
Oh no, not more
Yeah.
embarrassing photos.
And I think these have to do with kind of the history and what was going on as you guys were all coming together, building SunSpear. And I don't know, production, can you let me know if you're showing any of these pictures or which one so we can talk about what's in them?
There we go.
Oh man, yep.
All right, what are we
can
looking
see
at?
this. Well, aside from me and my first audition for a boy band, of which would
You
be
got the
ultimately,
swoop. It's really
I
good.
know, yeah, it's very angsty oddies. So this is in Bogota, Colombia, with our art director Javier next to me, and one of our colleagues in the Bogota sort of Colombian sphere of game development. His name's Jaime, and they're doing some really cool. They're an indie studio, awesome people, doing this cool retro sort of platformer game right now. Um, that's like based on Mash, or not Mash, but like it's sort of an homage to 1970s Americana, which is really
Mm.
cool. And he was actually taking us through some of the first sort of elements right there. We did a series of we met him and a ton of other people in Latin America by doing some consulting with emerging markets and emerging gaming communities. And yeah, this is us at their office and in Bogota, Colombia. It was awesome. That dog, by the way, top
I was
tier,
going to ask.
A-tier dog.
Great. I'm glad that we're getting the best of games and the best of dogs. Let's check
Yep.
out another photo. What are we looking at here?
By the way, chat wants to know what the dog's position in the company is.
Oh, that dog absolutely was president.
The Posident.
Yes.
Yeah, president. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, that pun gave me pause.
All right, what are we looking at here? This looks like a gathering.
Yeah, so this is at the Sun House, which was kind of an early office in the days before and after the advent of COVID, where we hunkered down. These are friends and family of the devs. Rhodey's there, director of marketing. John, assistant creative director. And assorted friends and family. And this was one of our many barbecues where I got to kind of flex my cooking muscles. And it's in the Rogue Valley. It's absolutely gorgeous there. It's a little slice of sort of Mediterranean California north of the Californian border. So really cool blend of different cultures and pieces of Americana there. Lovely place.
So the Sun House, meaning, is this the kind of a place where people lived and worked as SunSpear came to be?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah. Very much the incubator vibes.
Yeah,
So-
we had the
Awesome.
Sun House, and then we had to have the Moon House just for the lulls and the little bit of
Well,
Pokemon.
well, and also I mean, so there's a joke where like a rite of passage of working at the company involves basically staying with Kevin Wagner, our CEO, and his family for a week or more. And
Yeah.
I think 6 or 8 people at this point have done that. I did it. So a brief thing. Kevin's not in this photo, but he frequently attended these sort of gatherings. And he is a guy. He literally flew into the town I was living in at the time, which was Bozeman, Montana, and like helped me pack, and then co-drove with me in a U-Haul the 14 and a half hours to the Rogue Valley from
Wow.
Montana. And he did it multiple times for multiple
Yeah.
people. And then he played host to me while we were getting everything sorted out on the housing front. And I think the takeaway of this photo is SunSpear really is like a family, and I don't mean that in this sort of like in a Viridian Dynamics from Better Off Ted sort of way. It was like family works on nights and weekends because family should be together. I mean, literally, we are a family of our choosing. We have built these very strong relationships that have weathered very trying times. Doing a startup in any environment is challenging, and doing it with all the unique challenges of whether it's with going through a pandemic or going through sort of the tumultuous changes in this industry, it's hard. And the way you get that through that is with trust and compassion. And I think this is one of many examples about how tight our team is.
I think I was gonna move up to Oregon or planning to do it, and then immediately COVID happened. I'm like,
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
I'm
literally
not.
had the plane ticket set aside, right, for some of or
We had like a rough time estimated. Like we
yeah.
might do this in like 3 months, and then nope.
Nope.
Mm.
Just
Nope,
kidding.
not gonna do it.
Well, we
Just leave it
have
like
tons
this
of
is fine.
questions and not as much time as I would like. So let's keep going through these photos. I want to see the rest of them before we move on. What's next? I see a cat. This is important. Who's the cat?
Uh-oh.
And the human too, I guess.
Well,
I love
I know
cats.
the human, but I actually don't know that cat.
I
All
know.
right, we'll
It's
just talk
Bert.
about the human
It's
then.
Bert. It's Ian's brother's cat. I'm 90% sure it's Bert.
I don't know this cat, but I want to know the cat.
You're a wise
Right?
person.
Well to
Bert.
do with that bow tie.
I
He's a
feel
cutie.
like I just have to point out that of all the companies I work with, I feel like SunSpear is the most willing always to talk about animals and understand how important they are, down to like the rewards food for the company's pets being one of the Kickstarter tiers. So
Yeah.
I just want to give a brief shout out to us gamer animal lovers here. But now let's talk about the human in the photo. Who's this?
This is Big John. Big John is he's works on concept and moved more into creative, so he's co-creating the world with Dylan. And he helps add so much of that visual life and flair. And so, yeah, he's also an incredible animal lover. People who join us on the Fireside Chats on Fridays often get the Brown cam. Brown is the name of his cat, also the name of his van. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but you guys can ask him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. John is in like so. I think John's story, and I apologize in advance if this is embarrassing to John, but so John comes from Tennessee and was kind of thinking about where he wanted to go in his life, and took a huge chance on us because this was very early. But we were like, yeah, we really like your concepts, we really like your imagination. Do you want to, work with us? And if it works out, move out to the West Coast. And he's thinking like, oh my God, okay, this is crazy, but was tempted and gave us a chance, and we really connected. And a year later, he drove you know, uh, in his van, almost breaking down in the Mojave Desert, 3 days
true
in.
facts.
Yeah, true facts. I remember the board meeting we were having when he called. He went, "Hey, so just a heads up, I have to I found a gas station that gave me enough water, and I'm going to put it into the radiator, and hopefully that gets me over." And I was like,
Heads
"Oh
up.
my
I'm
God."
in the desert.
But we're thinking, okay, like, how do we, like, we're going to drive out if necessary, pick him up, and get him over here. But John is one of the many people who placed his trust in the company during these early days when we were still very much figuring out how
Yeah.
things worked and what we needed to do to make things work. So
We're looking at
yeah.
another couple people here already. What is this place that you're
Well,
sitting in?
so while we can merge these two topics, uh, our dear lad on the left here, that is Tom Jack Attack Labonte. Tom also had quite a harrowing experience. He was driving across country as COVID was happening and had a blizzard chasing him through the Northwest as he came down here. And so we're like tracking it, and he's calling us for updates so that we know everything's okay. So, we've almost got like an Oregon Trail story for most people now.
Let's keep these photos coming because we do
Yep.
have tons of questions to get to. Uh,
There it is.
I I will not talk about the Pomeranian, even though I
We're
want
going
to
to talk
talk
about
about the
the
Pomeranian. Okay, talk about the Pomeranian. Go.
Yeah, you've already seen me and Dylan. The new exciting thing is this perfectly toasted marshmallow, as it was often called.
Toki.
Toki, Toki is a wonderful story. Loved to be handled and played with, and then one day didn't. And then we learned that Toki ended up having a bit of a back issue. So if the Pomeranian is biting you when you try to reach in to do the normal thing, listen to the expressed need therein.
Poor baby.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Whose Pomeranian is Toki?
Friends. Just
Nice.
we going through
I love
houses, hanging out with friends.
that we're like, show us some pictures of the company history, and you guys are like, look at this dog that we held. It was our friend's dog.
So
And that's
both of
the whole point. I like it.
Yeah. I mean, like, we got together so we could let's be very clear, like, creep on people's dogs and cats. Both of those two photos are in the Santa Barbara area. One of the co-founders, Ian Hunt, used to be based there, and that kind of served as an early place for us to meet and brainstorm gameplay ideas. And this is actually this is in the mountains surrounding Santa Barbara, where we're getting a really in-depth lesson from Coulter about why Shadowrun Arena was one of the greatest tack shooters ever made, which was frankly inspiring, and I still remember most of the points today.
Yes, mission successful.
This is sort of like that transitory period of time between us being modders and transitioning into being a company. And these are sort of the formative moments where we're forging these strong bonds that would be so important later on.
It has like Sound of Music vibes. The hills are alive.
Yeah, with
That
the
is a
sound of nerding.
very small animal.
Oh my god, this kitty.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah. See, we're back to animals. Chat.
Yeah,
Are you
what was
happy
happening
now?
in this picture? Where were you then?
Travis, this is your story to tell. There is a tiny cat.
Oh god. So we me and my ex, we rescued kittens from a dumpster, a trash compactor.
Yes.
They had put 3 precious kittens in a
No, who
trash
would do
compactor.
that?
I know.
I'm so glad you saved
And
them. Good
so
job.
they were absolutely tiny. They were like a week or less. And we bottle fed them and everything. We even have cute pictures of like Ian coming over to help bottle feed them, and it was amazing because they would just climb straight up you. They were absolutely precious. So, yep, that would be. They have wonderful names. They have Thumbelina, um, Professor Snugglebottoms, also named Dylan, also named Tofu.
Wow. So it seems like you all came together, like you said, Dylan, kind of with friendship and growth alongside the company growth.
Yeah, I think the key thing is there's a sort of practical compassion that is at the heart of who we are and the kind of company and community that we've wanted to build since day one.
Mm.
And, living up to those ideals is complicated and messy because we're all humans. We all have shitty days, right? And the key thing is to be honest and direct with one another and to extend practical compassion with each other.
Mm.
And I think so many of the problems in the industry, not just our industry, but largely in entertainment, is there's just a huge issue of fear of getting things wrong or becoming legally vulnerable or all this stuff. And yeah, like accountability can be really scary. But I mean, yeah, and there's obviously a lot of stakes. But we have charted a course for ourselves and for each other and for our community that's focused on accountability and compassion early and often. And that builds trust, and trust is very powerful.
Mm. Well, that's as good a time as any to wrap up the photos, unless there's any that we're missing. I think that might have been the last one. And going from there, we do have more to show. Travis, I think you have some show and tell for us. I believe of some early bits of development that you can give us a preview of.
I do. Hopefully, it
Ancient builds.
Oh my goodness. What a tease.
All right.
It's so ancient.
Yeah.
There you are, Travis.
All right, let's go. So this is when we first started working in Unreal 4 Engine. So this is a pathing, a movement system that I built very early days. So you can see there, like they actually have a formation that they're holding, and they're going to move and keep from one point to the next. The units are, having good collision against each other because you don't get that by default. A good collision system in UE4 by default. So you have to build your own collision system so that they can bump into each other properly. Let's see if it's a little bit of a slow video. And like here, like I have little like debug status trackers for if they're moving or if they're idle. So all that sort of fun stuff. And then we have
Wow.
other cool videos to show off. He was like,
This took me back to the very early days of our modding, where I'm like, oh my god, it's happening again, but this time like it's real.
Mm.
Or I guess I should say unreal.
here's the
Oh,
very first video of showing off 4 different players from 4 different clients instead of it just being on like a single client,
Wow.
and showing off that like, hey, okay, cool, we have a networked movement between each game, which is that was like the first experience where I'm like, hey, I have 4 people all playing in the same environment and shooting at each other, moving around, and that was just a really cool first moment whenever I got that up and running.
It's so
This was back
interesting
whenever
because
we had way fewer programmers to help us out with.
I bet that people often don't even take the time to think about these early steps, like, oh yeah, my units don't just naturally know to stay in a formation, and they have to be told that. And actually having everyone look at the same battlefield at the same time is actually pretty amazing. So it's cool to see these early pieces and remember where you start from with a game like this.
Yeah, it's incredible to go back and be like, wow, we've improved so much when we have we've gone from being able to like optimize and get all the movement working and iterate on the UI and like come back and see this. I'm like, wow, it feels like our when you're in the moment, everything feels so static, and then you're like, you look back and like, wow, we really came from that, and it's amazing.
that
I think
walking in place is they didn't have like idle animations. They only had their walk animations, so they just keep
Oh yeah,
playing
they just stood in place and just kept running.
and dance, man. It's
when
like a moonwalk, but not quite.
when I saw this, I darn near like lost it because okay, this is I don't know what this is.
this
What
is
is
This
this
is
is the
happening
first
right
time implementing. Okay, look, this is the first time I implemented a custom art for a mouse cursor. All right, and I learned that look, because every artist is going to give you like a high, massive resolution piece to everything, right? So, but it turns out if you want to do a hardware cursor, which is different than a software cursor because it's like actually in Microsoft, like in the engine, right? So it's way more responsive. It turns out it's always going to display a hardware cursor at that exact resolution. So it turns out if you just slap in some artist's mouse cursor, it's going to be massive.
That's hilarious. Okay, that's a dev shit post I have never seen
Yeah,
before. That's
Yep.
news to
amazing.
me.
That's a mode that you've got to put in an Easter egg somewhere for us that we
Oh
can play
yeah,
with giant mouse.
yeah.
Yep. So we have plenty of these videos. I could go on and on with these videos, which is like
Literally
the
days.
overtime process. Here's just like this is our first queue. So you hold the shift button, and actually the troops will go from one point A to point B to point B to C, and before that they never did, etc.
Mm.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'd just comment on is so one of the big unknowns going into Unreal, we knew it's obviously a very powerful and relatively accessible engine. But one of the issues is handling large character counts in a networked game. And that earlier piece was a pretty pivotal proof of concept showing that we could have large army battles
Mm.
with some of our innovative solutions that I can't talk about. But that was a really cool growing pain where we're like, oh man, I'm not sure how we're going to solve this. And Travis does what Travis does best, which is dark magic.
I got to shout out our art teams and art collaborators. We've got, of course, the SunSpear proper, and then we've also got people that we've worked with in Latin America, help make it all more beautiful. And then, of course, things are back running on the back end a lot better thanks to our team in India. So shout out to those guys for helping us put this far in the rearview mirror.
Oh, that was amazing. That death animation.
Oh yeah, that's just playing around with the rag dolls and messing up about with that.
Travis, is there anything else in particular we need to look at for show and tell before we move to Q&A?
Nope, I don't think so. We can move on to.
This has been
Q&A.
great. All right. Well, hopefully we'll get a chance to peep a few more of those historical videos in the future. But for now, we want to make sure that we get to your questions. And to frame those before we do, I realize we've been talking about where this came from, what are the underlying ideas, where's the passion, but we really actually haven't talked about what is Immortal Gates of Pyre? What did it become? So if somebody is just watching the stream being like, I like RTS and you guys sound along the same lines as my thinking, what did you make me? What would you tell them?
I would say you have an action strategy experience. So that is not focused on chores. We've really focused on making it about the strategic choices you make and the battles you fight, which is why we tend to call it battle strategy sometimes internally instead of like RTS MOBA hybrid or
Mm,
an RTS specifically. RTS players feel at home because in a lot of ways it's RTS without the bullshit, which is a
mm.
internal line that we've tried on but haven't quite made it
RTS without the BS
headlining.
was the sort of dad label.
Yeah, exactly. So it is a way to like command armies without having to run drills or do all that. And then of course there's all the Dylan side of things. There's this incredible story world with these characters that are just playing across all these different kinds of themes. And I love what he does in the world building. Just a moment of nerdiness, guys. We have mapped out the tectonic plates on the planets, and then the resulting climate, and then the trade winds, and then where the different kinds of civilizations would develop in those resulting climates that are done. And then there's political boundaries, and then we're starting to get to the things that actually make it into the game. So there is all of this meat on the bone that ultimately results in these really cool characters and their stories. And so, like, there's so little of that story you get to see in the game yet that takes so much of a labor of effort from art, but that's going to be a cool part of the experience is seeing these characters and sort of becoming these immortals, these powerful commanders with very special magic.
That's a good
Yep.
place to jump into one of our first questions, actually, which is, can you explain your ideas and philosophies behind approaching cooperative content in Immortal, both from an objectives and gameplay standpoint and from a world building standpoint? Because I know that cooperation is another hallmark of Immortal. So tell us about that.
I'm going to let someone else take this one.
Travis, you're up.
So if we want to talk about, I can talk about gameplay and objectives from the world building standpoint. I am also going to steal that from Dylan. It's gonna be fun. We like to
I will fight
ground
you.
everything out into like a place where something cool happened and is tied to the lore, right? It's not just some abstract arena that people are going to play in, or some randomly generated map that is just vaguely somewhere. But we want to ground it out into the world building. Like, this is a place of history. Um, and then as far as objectives and gameplay standpoint go, um, we have a bit more iteration to go on that front. We've been more focused on the PvP front, but we do know that we're wanting to be very iterative towards how we approach it, and we want to make sure that, like, as far as a co-op content, we want to make sure that it's not just you play a scenario one time and then like that's as fun as it gets. But we want to make sure that like there could be modifiers, there could be, you know, harder difficulties, and like specific challenges that kind of like changes how you approach it. More options to work with, like more interesting options than just like here's just your faction that you know and love from PvP and it just does the same stuff. But instead, we want to give tools to like kind of shake things up of what tools a player has and how they can approach that cooperative experience with new tools that are cooperative and, you know, PvE specific, so that you can be more zany and have like more interesting strategies going on.
Yeah, it's got like a element of deck
Unbalanced.
building or an ARPG for the co-op specifically, where you're going to try to combine all these crazy bonuses and powers to create a damage engine that can take on difficulties that no human should be capable of.
Yeah.
Oh, go
Okay.
ahead.
Oh no, please.
Well, I was going to say that that's a good segue to the next question. So speak now or forever answer the next question.
I guess I would just add from a world building perspective, we wanted to make sure that so we built a setting that is very multipolar in the terms of like sources of different national power. There's a lot of different nations that are competitive or becoming competitive for different reasons, and they all are they all have built in such a way that they're not strong enough to conquer everything initially, and that necessitates tenuous, perhaps, alliances. And there's points of cultural synergy that they have with different factions and areas of cultural, ideological, or political tension, which may cause them to fight. And so the idea is any particular team pairing, there are reasons for that. And that's something that we really want to communicate through voice acting and writing.
Mm.
So that's what I would add to that.
This question is for people who are thinking, you know what, this sounds really, really fun. I like the themes, but I'm a little worried because I know Starcraft's super hard. So the question is, are there any plans for tutorials that would also introduce players that are new to RTS as a whole to help with the steep learning curve that typically accompanies games in that genre? And I'm going to append another question to this because someone asks, from which non-RTS games, if any, did the team draw inspiration? Because I feel like you can talk about if there are players who like other kinds of games, where are they going to find things that they recognize or are excited about?
Well, the first thing is there's a couple things when you're trying to evaluate the difficulty of the game. The two biggest are probably how many mandatory skills are there and how difficult are the controls to use. And when you're evaluating the difficulty of the game, it's not necessarily about to be great. It's just to get to the fun. What do you need to do to get to the fun? And we've taken a lot of effort into removing mandatory skills. They're optional. You can opt into them, optimize that part of the experience, get a better game state, win more games. But if you're not into that, it's entirely optional. And so what that means is you can play Immortal as a 3-button game. Simpler than a MOBA hero, simpler than a lot of FPSs, where all you're doing is attacking and retreating and moving out on the map to get some objectives, attacking and retreating. So from a very basic level, you don't need to learn tech trees. You don't need to learn what all the units do. You just pick a couple that look cool from a suggested list, and you're off to the races. You're going to have fun. And then as a part of that, like we've really smoothed out a whole bunch of the controls so that you don't have to engage with all the things that make StarCraft such a legendarily hard game.
Mm.
And there's defender's advantage. So if you mess up, you get to try again within the same match instead of getting the big loss screen. And now you have 100 more cheeses you need to memorize. And if you forget them and come back to the game, you're going to feel like an idiot. Like that is gone because you've got these safe places you can retreat to, and you've got these easy controls you can engage with. And then as you're feeling it, you can opt into more and more skills.
Yeah, and it's important to, like, as you opt into that more competitive experience, those safe spaces become less and less safe for the sake of competitive integrity. But I
Yeah.
think, and this is why it took so many years to get this formula to work, because those two, the needs of competitive play and the needs of an accessible game, are in very tight tension in a lot of areas, and so it required very specific solutions working in tandem to achieve that dynamic.
Yeah, so we made the game easier, and we're going to have a bunch of onboarding. One of the things we have and that people are playing this weekend right now is called mini games. It takes a small slice of the experience and lets you just learn it in a gamified way. You've got a score, you can repeat it as many times as you want, and then when you get in the actual game, it's all in your hands already. You don't have to think about it. You can be existing on the strategy level of thought rather than the, oh, what button do I press next
Mm.
thought. And so that's going to just take out a lot of bad experiences that people typically have as they're getting comfortable with things. It's just going to remove them. You can just have fun in mini games, and then now you're ready to rock.
As far
I
as
think, no, go ahead.
as far as game inspirations go, I guess that was
Yeah, I
like
was
an
going to
entirely
ask you
different
that.
question. We definitely have inspirations from like Overwatch, um, and in terms of like ultimates, that
Dota.
kind of idea
Yeah.
where Dota, League of Legends, that idea where you have even if you're like losing, you still have like this moment of power where you can feel more powerful instead of you just getting smashed the entire time. That does a lot to add to that. But we did it in a way that it's sort of like tied into an economic resource, and that helps to make sure that it's not just like okay, everybody's going to get an ultimate and everybody's going to feel bad because they got ultimated on, right? And instead, it's going to scale based on like your skill level, right? Where lower level players they might not use their resource for casting ultimates as much. They might use it on other spells or building towers, etc. And that kind of means that like if a lower level player might end up casting like an ultimate or something more often than a
Yeah.
higher level player. we have different philosophies in mind. Where if anyone has ever played Destiny 2, where it's like you hit to the point where it's like, okay, here's the minute mark of the game where everybody gets their ultimate, and you just get bopped for free, and then it doesn't feel rewarding. It doesn't feel like there's a proper equivalent exchange going on here. It's just you're playing a different game now where everybody kills each other in one hit. It's like we wanted to make sure that it's sort of like tied into a system that makes sense. It's not just a here's a free blow up an enemy army card, right? Like we have that kind of inspiration. But yeah, we wanted to make sure that utility of like what an ultimate does to make sure that it's not you just getting battered the entire time kind of feel of a video
Mhm.
game.
I think the key, takeaway from like MOBA design, like Dota, is sort of the radical asymmetry of expression of power based on an iconic character or personality, and mixing and matching those powers create memorable stories. And as Travis said, for those stories to have impact, they need to resolve the game state in some way. And they need to fit into that, and they should not be arbitrary. And I think Travis has done an amazing job of folding that into the fundamentals of strategy games, which is going out, taking territory, holding it, and jostling with your opponent for territory.
I'm going to go with Bejeweled.
What? How is Bejeweled in the game?
Bejeweled is juicy. You take an action and particles fly everywhere and it feels good. Now, there's not a lot of juice in our game yet. There is some, but there's a lot more to come. We're gonna have pretty colors flying, satisfying death animations, guys. It's gonna change the game feel.
You
Juice
heard it
is
And
the
here first.
audio
Juice.
effects, like any audio effects, that's what really high on my wish list. That's something I'm
I
excited
love
about.
the term juice. It's like it's the ultimate, like it when you see it kind of thing. But
Yeah,
it doesn't have like a true
oh,
technical term.
Zerg buildings blowing up. Oh,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
dragoons popping in Brood War, along with the sort of flatlining, like dee. Oh, it's good. Watching
There's
a siege
nothing like
tank
a
blow 'em up.
baneling. Just
Oh yeah,
Yes.
Baneling is juice the unit.
It is. It is.
They're
Uh,
literally gushers.
Travis, what you were just talking about really speaks to one of these questions as well, which is what are the kinds of spells you feel like are not fun to play against that are present in a lot of other games like RTS, MOBAs, hero shooters, that you want to either not make or try to change to fit inside Immortal?
This is a perfect question for Travis.
Yeah. um, we love interaction. Like that's kind of just the holy grail of gameplay is always just making sure people are interact. So anytime we find a spell where it's doing any sort of crown control, lockdowns, snares, root stuns, that sort of thing, we have to be very, very careful with it and make sure that it fits. So like force fields in StarCraft 2, right? Like force field in StarCraft 2 was just really uninteractive. The opponent, the Protoss player, kind of like put down these force fields down, and their opponent just kind of had to deal with it, and they had to like run around or just wait, and they didn't really have options. And then Legacy of the Void came out, and they had Ravagers, and that was like just a tool literally just designed to fight the force field and make sure the game became interactive again. So we're careful when it comes to making sure that one effort to reward ratio is kept in mind. Like how much effort do you have to put in versus how much have you like psychologically affected your opponent.
Yeah.
That's one of the core tenets, and that goes beyond spell design.
Yeah, like the
That goes
Colossus,
to
right?
So I want you to
Colossus is
yeah.
kind of the
I want you to imagine the graph.
Reapers. I remember a Starbow meta where we had like incredibly strong Reapers, and they were just super annoying to deal with, and they did so much damage, and it was a lot more annoying to defend against it than it was to use and play. Oracles or something you keep, or example in StarCraft 2. Things like if you just constantly are like if anybody's played Overwatch, you're Bridget, you're constantly ceasing people, and you hit one button, it like that kind of thing. It like disrupts game flow and the flow state of the game. We're very careful about those kinds of things, and we make sure when people do cast it, that it's proportional. And in RTS, luckily, we kind of have an alleviating factor where it's not that you just control one unit. If you get CC'd, you're out of the game. You're just stuck there twiddling your thumbs. But like it's okay if you get like 5 units locked down and you still have like 30 more to control. You still have something to do. So we
Yeah.
have all sorts of these philosophies in mind when we try to design our spells.
Imagine for a moment that a match in a competitive game is like a rap battle. then the CC is muting their mic, and there's not you
Mm,
can't do that too much, right? That's not a good feel for the player.
that makes a lot of sense. This also is about players having a good time and what you've done in Immortal to make that happen. This one asks, do you have any strategies planned to tackle the issues of balance and players having to learn a lot of mashups?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a few. I'll hit them real quick and then toss it over to Travis. So the first thing is we have the hotkeys are laid out so that when you move between factions, if you just do what you know from the other faction, you're gonna mostly get what you need out of the other one. So if you've got a frontliner unit on one faction, it's gonna be in the same key on the next one. Your spellcaster's in the same spot. So there's these generalized concepts like frontliner, Harrier. A Harrier is a unit that doesn't want direct conflict. It has tools to sort of get around, sneak around, and cause trouble. There are these generalized concepts that once you know the roles of the unit and your fingers already know one faction, you've already done a bunch of the work to understand and interact with the other ones. So the units are remixes on these roles, and then occasionally we get really, really oddball units in there. And the other thing is balancing for a closed system like StarCraft 2 is very different than balancing for an open system like Immortal. So there's going to be patches that help that, but also you're going to have a lot of counters and tools in your pocket to deal with the opponent. 2v2, if you're playing that mode, you're facing more rounded enemies and you have more rounded tools as a team to deal with it, so you don't really get into as many extreme situations. And finally, we have this whole concept called balancing levers. There are certain spells that are just very, very difficult or impossible to balance because they don't have ways that you can pull up or down the power effectively. So when you're approaching the units and spell designs, you need to make sure they've got plenty of balancing levers so that when you do inevitably end up in a balancing problem situation, you can pull this one a little bit and that one a little bit. And, oh, okay, now we've got something that feels good.
Yeah. And I'll just keep this one brief, but we have an important standpoint on consistent rules and rules that can apply from one faction's units to the next. So we want to make sure that, hey, if your unit's fast, right, and it's shooting like, I don't know, fire acid or something, right, it's probably going to be good against, lighter infantry troops, right? We don't want like magical rules happening out of nowhere. We've got to make sure that the visual language does as good of a job as marking the gameplay mechanics, so that whenever you look at one faction play, you can like kind of get a grasp of the rules of our systems, and then it becomes easier to learn the next and the next and the next and the next. So that, okay, if you see something and it's like hitting like a truck and it's got like a big like piercing looking projectile, right, and it's just like it's a big impact. All right, cool. That's probably gonna do better damage against larger targets than smaller targets. So we have these consistent rules that we want to make sure that are applied and consistent, and we're not doing the magical MOBA thing where oh, they casted a spell on me. Oh, I learn like 10 games later that I'm not supposed to apparently run from that champion while they're using it on me. Otherwise, I just die. All right, cool. So
Yeah,
we,
that's part
we
of Dota's design that we don't want.
yeah,
This particle effect means you have to do this particular mini game or you die.
yeah. If we have a unit that's just kind of like hunched down and like pointing all of its like armaments towards the sky, it's probably going to be a good tool to shoot against air units. Like it's you have to learn the initial language. So of course it's anybody jumping in for the first time is like, what does that do? What does that do? But after you get to grips with the game and kind of like start, it becomes much quicker to learn. Right, everything feels a little bit more like a chess piece than like a completely brand new MOBA character that does God on earth knows what. I honestly cannot read MOBAs still to this day when I try to play them. They're fun, but yeah, I can't read them.
I want to ask, we talked a little bit about this before, so hopefully you have thought of an answer. But the question is, what is your favorite dark design that can't make it into the game, and why doesn't it work? And maybe explain what dark design is in case somebody isn't familiar.
Dark
Culture, take it away.
design. This is my domain.
It is.
Domain of terrifying ideas that strike fear into your soul because they're mostly bad. But one in a long time is going to be amazing. And so dark design is sort of like our way to slap a label on an idea and be like, hey, like, you don't need to explain to me how this doesn't work for the basics, but like, is there something here? Is there something crazy? My favorite dark design idea was from our implementer, Harry. Harry, wonderful human with hilarious ideas. His idea was he just really wanted absolvers. There's a particular unit that has like these 4 rather spindly legs that move across the battlefield. Wanted it to take his hands, plant them in the ground, do a handstand, and then just spin with its legs being blades, just killing everything that comes close to it. And there's just so many reasons why that doesn't work, but the art would be amazing. And also, like the skins, like Will It Blend edition of Immortal is it's got a place in my soul.
Oh my god, I forgot that existed. My dark design's also absolver based, and I'm gonna try to not remember. Okay, sorry, I'm dealing with the imagery, and it's a struggle. So I actually also there's a dark design thing that was internally submitted by Harry as well about the absolver. And this one actually is one of the rare ones that stuck, where he's like, well, what if it had. So, the current problem with the absolver in terms of gameplay is it kills structures way too quickly, while simultaneously, in order to do its job of being a strong positional zone control tool. So they was trying to find a way to allow it to attack multiple units and lower its DPS versus buildings. And he's like, well, what if it like just had a black hole in its center that ripped out the souls of anything that got close? And I thought about it for a long time and went, yeah, we can actually rewrite the lore a little bit, and we can probably redesign the unit's art eventually and really sell that. That's a really compelling idea. And there's like this stunned silence from Harry. He's like, wait, it worked? I'm like, yeah. And Travis is like, this is great. I don't have to fight creative for a gameplay solution. Like, yeah, no, I think this just works. So that's my favorite. It's the one in 1,000 that just like stuck the landing.
It's awesome.
Mine is definitely from Toby, one of our software devs. So this fun idea, I actually have it on the screen share if we want to switch over to that, so I can show it. So
he
this
just
is
has it
on
in his back pocket.
Yeah, of course. This is on the Dervish. So this unit is normally a unit that's just like, it just like swipes and it like hits enemies with it's like little cleave attack kind of thing. It attacks in melee. So the dark design idea, here's what it works like normally. You run up and then you start dealing AoE damage on these guys, and bam, cool. That's fun. It's positional. They're cool, fast melee guys. But the dark design idea was kind of based on the fact that they have giant like cleaving wings kind of looking thing, and they have a cool skating look to them. So the design idea was that as you ran them, they have a little bit more of time building up their speed, and they would go through enemy units and just like phase through them. And the faster they're moving, they just constantly deal damage, like slicing their blades around them. And
yeah, momentum-based gameplay. You've got to accumulate it. You got to like babysit them.
you just got to keep microing them through the enemy, and that would just like as they walk through them, they would deal damage, or like right next to them. And there's a lot of like weird like parts about it, how it doesn't quite work with the combat systems that we have in the game. But I mean, Toby I'm sure will still disagree to this day. But
The brothers Sutherland, so Toby and Harry are brothers, and they're lads down under. They're wholesome as heck, pair of Kiwis, and they're brilliant and mad in equal measure. And I wouldn't have it any other way.
Awesome. That is a really fun question. Thank you to whoever submitted that. We have quite a few more, so let's jump right into talking about factions, because We had a couple questions about those. I'm going to pair them together. First is, I still find it hard to believe SunSpear is planning on 15 factions total after several years from launch. How does SunSpear plan to keep these factions diverse yet balanced? And then another question similarly says, I know that we have our first 5 factions mapped out before launch, but what post-launch faction are you all most excited for specifically?
So we kind of hit
Um,
the balance the earlier. The tuning levers, open system, and working on unit archetypes and working with that system. But specifically, 15 factions would be after a decade of development or more.
yeah,
So
we'd be
sorry,
launching one
decade
one a
goes by.
year every 18 months or something. It's
Yeah.
a lot of work to make a faction.
Right.
A lot
So
of
there
work.
will be, tens of thousands of man hours just really, really making that feel good. But I would say for me, faction post launch, oh, there is a sister faction to the Aru and the Iratek that is sort of like time themed. They're like these ancient druidic keepers of knowledge. Now, it may change in the time from now, but I really, really like this weird mix of like the sort of tree nature magic with a time element and like a keeper of ancient doom almost. The that plays together in this very mystical, almost like oh, I can see it in my head.
Yeah, like Miyazaki, like Children
Miyazaki,
of the
thank you.
Forest.
Yep,
Yep,
nailing it. The
yep.
little guys in the
They're on
forest.
the mood board. Yeah, Yule. They're awesome. Yeah, so I mean, the key thing is you got to look at Immortal as a big universe IP, where there's a lot of space for different cultures, and cultures and nations aren't monoliths. They're incredibly diverse things, and one of the ways that we can show the complexity in that is by giving the space for people to play how these cultures interact with each other in conflict. Um, and there are a ton of things that you can mechanically differentiate that I'd love if Travis could kind of give us a quick run through on. But suffice to say, like there's an enormous pool of lived experiences within human history. Like you can't quantify humanity as a single faction or tribe. We are an incredibly diverse species. And so, yeah, there's an enormous amount of diversity that we can explore through, 10, 15, 20 years of gameplay.
Yeah. So, and in terms of
Oh.
go ahead, Coulter.
Oh no, you were cutting out. Please restart.
Oh, all right. No, internet, please. Mercy. Oh God. All right. Are we good? Are we good?
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
good.
All right. So in terms of balancing, um, I don't think we're quite in the dark days of games where balancing is as much of a problem as it used to be. You see Super 74 characters, something like that, and it's one of the most balanced. It is the most balanced Smash of all time. This is becoming more of a fine art as part of game development than just sort of an afterthought that it used to be. So if you come from the ages where like every single strategy game was just completely imbalanced, it's because it was just never focused, right? So whenever we're working on it as a long term game, right? Than and caring more about the competitive community, right, and making sure that we're caring about effort to like how frustrating it is to fight against all these things, and we have archetypes, right, and we have all these balancing levers. It's a lot less scary than it's made out to be, and even with creative space for more factions. I'm continually, my mind is blown. How much more ideas there are to play with, how many more unit types there are, and how they function. I am constantly surprised because at first I was incredibly skeptical of this as well, but then we actually have gone through different archetypes of units and just gone like we did a litmus test first to say how many different ways can we make a positional ground control unit? How many different ways can we make some kind of unit or spell caster that is good at dislodging positions. Like we've gone through and done that, and
Oh no.
They could work relatively well. No, internet, please.
We got
We
most
got
of
there.
them.
Just
Yeah.
barely
Yeah.
across the finish line.
Yeah, the main point is that we've gone through and kind of like done exercises and gone through. We've built the Vanguard mod, which already had 6 factions itself. So we firmly believe there's absolutely the creative design space for it.
Great. Now we have 3 more topics I want to make sure to cover. Sorry if we didn't get to answer your question. There's so many good ones, but these 3 topics I want to talk about competitive and pro play. I want to talk about company growth, and I want to talk about community. So first, let's have the questions about competitive, which were I'd love to hear plans regarding pro play and potential tournaments, official ones or community-made ones. And a sister question to that, what kind of cool observing tools do you have in mind?
So for the competitive side, we think that SunSpear's role is really to help enable the community at first and help provide like quality materials, cool things that you can throw up on screen that just allow everyone who is working in the Immortal ecosystem to increase the quality level. And then as the game matures and is closer to a competitive state, then we can start putting more effort into it and building out that competitive scene. We absolutely have aspirations of Immortal being an esport. We've seen a lot of attempts from big companies to just be like, this is now the next esport. And it hasn't worked that well. I mean, we've got situations like Overwatch where it's done, pretty well, but then there's a whole bunch of other games that have attempted that and just sort of dictated what it was going to be that. So we're going to support, enable, empower, and then as the game is in a place for that, ramp up more of that for competitive. And I'm really excited to see what the 2v2 and 1v1 and all the different configurations that it can take, where the community takes that and what starts to be sort of like the primary competitive format. I'm very curious to see where the community goes with that.
What
Uh,
about the observer modes?
yes. Okay, so there's this idea I have that I haven't got past Tom yet called the Carnage meter. And the Carnage meter is like this beautiful little pie, and each slice of it represents a player. And so each time that player deals damage, their slice grows. So you'll see like this player deals damage, and their little pie slice like sticks out of the pie and grows larger. And so over the course of the fight, you see this thing getting larger, but it also decays pretty quickly over time. So it's this based on the size. You can see when big damage happens, and then it'll deteriorate, and then it'll be refreshed with little damage. You can really get a sense with just this one element what is happening on the side. The concern here is people will watch that instead of the units fighting each other. So there's a balance to strike. But I mean, it's called the Carnage meter. I feel like
Yeah, I
it's
don't
got
want to
promise.
compete with that. I mean, I'm pretty skeptical because, I mean, it's so metal. It's too metal, Coulter. We've gone too far.
Yeah, we have a thing that a lot of people might think is for spectators, but it's actually for players as well. We have combat efficiency. So units killed, the value of units killed, divided by your value of units lost. And so you as a team will have a combat efficiency. And when it's going in your favor, it goes like this. And when it's going not in your favor, it goes down like this. And this is going to help you understand the story of what's happening in the game at a glance a lot easier than in the past. And that'll definitely be present for the spectator mode as well.
That seems really helpful for an audience as they're just learning how a game
Yeah.
works.
All the flashy lights, what does it mean? Oh, the line went up a
Hmm.
lot. I think it means a lot.
Dylan, Travis, anything to add real quick on pro play, competitive play,
Yeah,
observing?
I guess I would just say is pro play is the thing that drew me to strategy games to begin with because they're such powerful expressions of skill, personality, and excellence. The difference between someone just doing standard like a move with a bunch of vultures and brood war versus Nada or Nara or boxers and mortal marines. Uh, Scarlet's like Snapburrow Banelings, which is probably the best StarCraft 2 game that's ever been played. These are the things that are kind of like why we had the Olympics in like the Bronze Age. They are so evocative and powerful. And so our goal always is to deliver tools for people to express themselves. We just want more people to get into that magic and get invested in that process of discovery and mastery.
More rap battling is what he's saying.
All right, let's move on to our last couple topics. I want to talk about company growth. There are a couple questions like, will there be any chance of donating via your homepage to kind of keep the Kickstarter campaign running just on your own homepage? And then how have you started the process of hiring new people to the team and the monetary cost that brings in? So speak to us a little bit about as you move forward, monetization, growth, all of that.
Yeah, so we love you guys wanting to send us money. Donation feedback is great too. We have thoughts around some interesting ways that can happen. That's going to be in the future. So we can't get into any specifics about you guys giving us money there. But keep watching and you'll find out more. And I really, really appreciate that, guys.
What about the
common
hiring new
question. Yeah,
people
no quite
and
answer.
all that?
Well, originally, like it was very similar to the modding experience. When you decide to make a company, you don't decide to suddenly have a big bank account. So you've got to basically talk with people, create that connection, and they got to want to pour their work into a vision that isn't theirs, to adopt it as their own. And so initially, it was really that barrier to collaboration and getting stuff done, that really having to be on the same page and adopt a shared vision, that sort of created the core of what SunSpear is now. And then from that, we did the Kickstarter, we've got funding, and so we're still bringing these really, really passionate individuals together to pour their effort into it. So it's just this process of finding people who really connect with the vision, who aren't just here to do it as their day job, but they really care about the player experience.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is, I think this is sort of what sets SunSpear apart from a lot of other companies. Is we're here to build the best damn game that we can, and we're here to work with people who have that as a passion and as a raison d'etre. We don't. We're a team that forges these really strong bonds because this isn't a 9 to 5 for us. This is something that we're in for the long haul, and we've been through thick and thin, and we've recruited extensively from modding communities. We come from modding communities because, there's difficulties there, like you have to learn organizational skills and whatnot, but there's a scrappy love for gameplay and shared experiences and a desire to share those experiences with others that I think just there's an inherent strength and resiliency to that.
Related, and this is kind of our final topic before we start wrapping things up. The question is, what kinds of community additions are you open to with a game like this?
We love to put tools in your hands. Sometimes it's very difficult to do so, but we're going to try. So hotkeys is where Tom and I started way back in the day. That's definitely going to be a thing. Guys, I believe that there are people out there who can show us a thing or two on our own designs and teach us where we've already spent hundreds of hours, scratching the earth. And the hotkeys, definitely. Maps, absolutely. Scenarios, we super want it. That's a tricky needle to thread, and something we're going to be working toward. Maybe even UI layouts. I don't know. That's also very speculative because there's a lot of competitive advantage questions. You don't want to end up in a situation where, like, if you don't have two screens, you might as well not even play Immortal because you got to put your mini map on one of them, which is not a good feel. So there's some, like, we've got to maintain the sense of fairness, but for the most part, we want to make this our game through the community contributions, feedback, whatever way it comes.
I think we may have lost Travis, but it's a good time to lose someone because we are just about finished. The last question that was asked that I think is very important to answer is, who is the best Immortal player in the SunSpear team? Travis will come back for that one. The question was, who's the best Immortal player? Yeah.
We summoned him.
All right, who is it?
Travis. Oh, Travis is here in spirit, apparently.
Oh no, yeah, my
There
back.
you are.
There he is.
There we go.
Very good. Oh,
right.
it's a lie. Okay, I'm gonna say it. I think that the best Immortal player is Javier, our art director. Yes, the art director is a grandmaster in Starcraft 2. So that puts a spin on things for you. There you go.
Yeah, Javier has done really obnoxious things. I remember he did a really brutal sentry drop and cheesed a GM Protoss player out of a game, which was hilarious to watch. He's incredibly creative and also just shows absolutely no mercy. But yeah, he's great. I love getting styled on by Javier.
All right. Well, since Travis is not here to contest at the moment, Javier, you are the winner. You are the best Immortal player, at least for the time being. And that will wrap up our question time for today. Thank you all for submitting those questions. Thank you, Coulter, Dylan, and Travis, for answering as many as we could possibly get to in this time. We even have gone over a few minutes because there's just so much fun stuff to chat about. I know there will be more coming up in the future. There will be plenty to watch. So don't forget to join the Discord. The link will be in the chat as well as in the YouTube description below us. And before we say goodbye, Dylan, Coulter, Travis, any specific goodbyes, called to actions, anything that you want to say to the community before we bid them adieu for the night?
The owl hoots at midnight.
Cryptic. You should all hang out with us on our Discord. I know there's a lot of questions that we didn't have time for. Feel free to pester us morning, noon, or night in the dev Q&A section. We love answering. We love
Yep.
engaging. I guess on a personal note, I'd like to thank all of my friends who have had the patience for me on this long, rambling journey over the last 8 years. Shout out to Clay, you know who you are. And shout out to Jordan and Kai, you know who you are. Just really happy to be on this journey with everyone.
Travis, are you there?
Pose to the camera.
Can anybody hear me?
Yeah. Final
Yay,
words,
I get to be
Travis.
part of the dev panel. Yes. Definitely big shout out to all of the amazing community testers, everybody who's been active and helping make the game better through your passion and your time.
What more is there to say, really?
It was so soulful.
It was.
Yeah.
Oh,
It was too
You know, once
beautiful
you've
for
said
our
it
mortal
all,
ears.
Oh no.
Once you've said it all, there's no need to say more. All right. Thanks, Travis. We hope that your internet heals from its mighty wounds that it has been suffering tonight. Now we are going to say goodbye for the time being. Don't forget to take the time to keep your eyes on these channels. There will be more coming your way. Right now, we're going to have about 23 minutes of a wait. But after that, we're going to be throwing this to the next person on the raid train, who's going to be Kaneko Lumi. So stay tuned for that if you can. And otherwise, have a fantastic night. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.